The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. We will get started in another 2 minutes to go, 2 minutes to start the webinar. So please sit tight and have that nice cup of coffee.
Hello guys, can you hear me?
Hey Louis, we hear you fine. I'm going to go ahead and mute you. We're live now and we're going to get started in 1 minute for everyone who's just joining us. 1 minute to go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to what I want to say is our first inaugural OpenNTF webinar. The hope is that this will be a series of webinars sponsored by OpenNTF on various topics. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank our presenters today who are volunteered their time to present to you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's first go through the agenda and let's see. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes about housekeeping here, and then Graham Akers, board member at OpenNTF, is going to speak a little bit about OpenNTF, where we've been, where we want to go with your organization. Then we're going to have Theo talking about the wine tasting app. Luis from HCL will talk about DQL Explorer. Paul Withers is going to go over OpenLog and how that can help developers and admins. And Jesse Gallagher is going to talk about a project he's done, NSF ODP tooling, as well as give a quick update on the Domino API. And then I'll close out the webinar and we'll take your questions at the end. So speaking about questions, everyone's going to ask, how do we ask questions? Yes, first of all, the first question is going to be, is this going to be recorded? And yes, we plan on recording this. We are hopefully recording it. And the goal is to put it up on the YouTube channel for OpenNTF. The link is up on the screen. And we will put that link in the follow-up email that we send you early next week. To ask your questions, please use the questions pane that you see in the GoToWebinar interface. It looks just like what you see on the screen now. We were going to answer your questions verbally at the end of the webinar. So ask your questions in the questions pane, and then we will cover those questions at the end. just wanted to do a shout out to our OpenNTF sponsors. There's quite a large number of people who help out, people and companies, but in particular, two companies really have helped our organization out a lot. And first, HCL has contributed a significant sum of money to OpenNTF to help fund things like this webinar, contests like we've run before. And we also help fund user groups as well. Pretty much a lot of the major user groups we've been sponsors for. Also, I'd like to thank Prominic, who donates basically all our IT-related services, cloud hosting, infrastructure management, system admin services. So thank you to those companies and the people at those companies for supporting our organization. OpenNTF is a nonprofit organization. It is run strictly by volunteers. And here is the current board members. Christian is our chairman this year. And then we have a number of other board members from various companies. So to talk a little bit about OpenNTF and what the organization is about, I'm going to turn everything over to Graham. So let me switch over to Graham and make him the presenter. Well, actually, Graham, I'm just going to make you, I'm just going to mute myself and you take it from here.
Thank you very much. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Howard, just there you go. Thank you very much. So I think the history of OpenNTF, I can probably go over this fairly quickly because if you're here, you probably know a little bit about the organization. But within our community, I think everyone would agree that OpenNTF is recognized as a strong brand and a place to go to get resources. And one of the things that we've reflected on is the fact that we've primarily been focused on the developer within the community, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But you know, specific to kind of the growth of X pages and lots of other things over the years, we've primarily served the developer community. And beyond the OpenNTF.org website and where you can go and download projects, we also have a GitHub environment, and that's something that we're focusing on for the future as well. Of course, very active on Stack Overflow, answering questions, and also using Slack. There was a bit of a transition a couple of years ago from a variety of different forums that were essentially shut down with the transition from IBM, and a lot of that community conversation was transitioned into Slack, so supporting the community that way. And then a variety of different initiatives, things like the Snippets program and collaborationtoday.org, which has been around for several years. And then recently paying more attention to guides and documentation and kind of that gap that's grown in the community. It was a great volunteer effort last year to get a Docker on Domino install guide put together, and we hope to be able to do more of those. So that's kind of where we've come from and been around for much more than 10 years. So thinking about the future of OpenNTF and what are the things that we want to do this year, and thinking about how we kind of grow use within the community, because we've seen a decline in contributions. And interestingly enough, we've started an initiative. Howard, you want to hit the slide, please? We've seen an initiative, or we've started an initiative to do with paying attention to the projects that are most popular on OpenNTF, and that's part of what this webinar is about. But in doing so, we've done some research to do with the amount of downloads that are happening off of OpenNTF, and actually we were all kind of surprised. There's still quite a consistent amount of effort, just downloads and traffic on the website. But anyway, focusing on 2020, so as Howard announced, we've entered into a strategic partnership with HCL, and there's more news to come there shortly. The slide went by pretty quick about the board members, but we've got 2 board members from HCL, so are working very closely. And so paying attention to the future, we want to kind of expand the portfolio beyond sort of the traditional Domino projects and pay attention to new stuff. So not only things like Volt, but also you know, tried and true connections, and even in the world of digital experience, and you know, scripts and tips, things that we can have that are available not only to developers but also to administrators and users, And so expand kind of our view beyond the traditional, I won't say that. We kind of all started as developers, so that was sort of naturally where we paid attention, but that's very limiting. We want to be beyond that. And as Howard had mentioned, supporting community events and contests, we're actually working on a little bit of an idea around that coming up here shortly. And then more options for access to solutions. So not only the OpenNTF site, as I said earlier, but GitHub, the HCL Solutions Factory effort is going on, and we're in touch with HCL on how we can collaborate there, and our wiki for documentation and other things. Specifically to do with this work that I mentioned about raising the profile of projects most used by the community, taking a look at how we can add more metadata and make things easier to find. And one of the things that we're looking for is input from the community on voting for your favorite projects, or perhaps making a contribution in terms of documentation or some other piece of information that's useful about a project. I'm actually looking forward to one of the presentations here, Paul's presentation about OpenLog. It's a project that's been around for a long time. I've heard people talk about it. Personally, I've never used it. So I'm actually kind of interested to see more about it and actually learn. So there's an example of somebody who's been in the community for a long time that's not necessarily aware of the best ways to use some of the projects that lots of other people use perhaps daily from OpenNTF. So we've all got something to share, whether we've been around for a long time or not, and whether our focus is development or administration or otherwise. And so that's part of what we're trying to do here, is set ourselves up to have the community participate in that way and share some of the things that they like about the projects that are on OpenNTF. Something else that we've been working on, this has been working on for a while, and we need to push it a little bit further to get it across the finish line, but a project we call sandbox.openntf.org, which is a Domino server that's open and available for people to use. So with the lack of the community edition of Domino that went away with the transition from IBM to HCL, people who don't have access to a Domino server to be able to play with, this concept is to have a Domino server that you can put some projects on and test them out for yourself. Howard, next slide. So this is our call to you. It's a great community. I think everybody that's been around for a while or even a short time knows that we're very welcoming and like to share amongst each other. So our invitation is to continue to do that and grow it. Of course, we're all volunteers, and interestingly enough, seems like busier now than ever before, in some cases anyway. But any small contribution is welcome, and as I say, even if you like, we want to give you the ability to say I like this project, and upvote it so that people can see how popular different projects are. But if you got an idea bigger than that, something that you think would be a neat project to do or something that would be of value, I think that if you had an idea that you think might be too big for yourself, let us know about it, because we can put together a group of people, volunteers, people inside OpenNTF and in the community that can put our collective brain power together and turn it into something that we can share with the community. So please do reach out to any one of us on the board and let us know your ideas. And beyond that, even testing or modifying an existing project, we've seen great effort from HCL in the last couple of years to move us from version 9 of Domino to 10 and 11, and Connections is pushing forward, and Digital Experience is pushing forward, and Volt. Older projects that you may know and love, but we're not sure work on Domino 11, for example, download it, install it, run it, tell us that it actually works, and then we can say it's verified to work on a particular version of the platform, whichever platform that might be. The guides and documentation, as I said, and then adding the reviews on projects and stars on snippets, all things where people can contribute. So first of all, thank you for helping us grow this community and keep it alive, and let's continue to be involved and share. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Oh, thanks, Graham. So we're going to turn things over to Theo. I think everyone knows Theo from Engaged, the founder of the Engaged user group. Theo has a project he's been working on, which I guess we'd call the Wine app. Now, are you going to roll out the Wine app to 100,000 users in your company? No, But Theo has leveraged the HCL Nomad and taken this old Notes client app and made it this really incredible mobile app. So I'm going to make Theo the presenter. There he is. 1 second, Theo. There we go, Theo. You should have the sharing screen now. And we see your screen, Theo.
Okay, there we go. I forgot to disable my mute. Hi everybody. I only have 12 minutes, so let's make this quick because we got a lot of things to show. And so here you go. Just a few things about myself. Nothing really important, but I've been at it for quite a long time. And like Howard said, I've been running the engaged user group for some time now. And I'm so incredibly happy that we managed to get an event going on early in March, just before this whole COVID nightmare came along, right? So, and I'm a HCL Grandmaster and an IBM champion for life. Yeah. And I like wine, as you can see, and as you'll find out. All right, so what are we gonna do? We're gonna see how we can develop for a touch device, which is always a kind of a nightmare, right? I mean, it's not really practical to do so until now, because there's something called Nomad. So, and then we're going to talk about the advantages of developing for a mobile device. We're going to see how we can turn a classic Notes app into something really cool, and then I'm going to tell you how we did this. So about mobile devices, I mean, there's a lot of devices coming along which have a touch interface, not only a laptop with touch, but I'm thinking about tablets, and I'm also thinking about smartphones. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of developing interfaces for smartphones because, I mean, the screen is pretty tiny, and you have to be, how can I say, you have to think out of the box in order to get some complicated websites, or sorry, some complicated Notes sites working on a smartphone, but it's doable. So for me, tablets are a lot more practical. They're easy, lightweight. They got a big screen, and you can really provide a nice, great user interface. So HCL came up with this really cool tool called HCL Nomad. The huge advantage is that it can run any Notes app on your tablet or phone unmodified. That also means that because it's unmodified, that it looks like a desktop application, which you might have written, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Yeah. So, but it's cool because it allows you to use some tools on your device which you're not used to. I mean, like you can use your camera, you can use GPS. It supports all add formulas and LotusScript. There's a few limitations that does not support Java, for instance, and it does not support Windows APIs calls, which is quite obvious. You can do complex forms. There is a built-in replication, so you can use it offline. And it's based on the user ID, so you got your full security system in place, which you're used to on the Notes desktop. Now, this is the original wine tasting app, 1.0, I call it. I mean, it is efficient, but it's rather boring. You have your classical categorized views. You have your navigation on the left-hand side. You got your forms, which are way too small fonts, and your header is too big, and I mean, because it's catered for a big screen and it's not catered for small fingers to touch with. So I said, we can do better than this. So this is Wine Tastings 2.0. So this is what you see when you start up on the left-hand side for the iPad, or for that matter, for an Android tablet, and on the right-hand side, what you see on an iPhone. It's just huge clickable buttons, and when you click on them, you see more. I'm going to tell you afterwards how it's done. I'm just going to show you quickly what you see on the screen. You see, you can have views with filters where you can select from a drop-down menu and switch to another year. On the right-hand side, you have that same kind of interface, like I said, on a smartphone, but you have to be a bit more creative. You can't show big views because, I mean, the screen is not wide enough. You can do some graphical stuff. This is just an image overlaid with mapping, and you can see that on both. Pretty simple. When you click on it, if you click on Europe, for instance, you go here again. You got drop-down menus where you can select from. This is the hierarchical drop-down, by the way, and automatically you see your data. By the way, everything you see here is of course also possible on a desktop. It's just that this is all bigger and made for being used with a touch with your finger, right? This is how a form looks like. Instead of having huge forms we have to scroll through, we divided it up. We broke it down into, well, you can look at it as sort of tabs. On the left-hand side, I can switch from mine into the tasting notes. And on the right-hand side, you see the same thing, but instead of having a horizontal layout, I selected to have some icons at the top where you can go from info to notes to label to similar wines. Okay. Of course, I mean, this is things which ACL has built into Nomad. If you have a date field and you're in edit mode and you click it, you get a nice date selector, which is pretty cool, right? Here you see the wine label. You see similar wines. It's just an embedded view, and it is really an embedded view. It just works like you're expected to work. Okay. Another nice thing I built in. I'm going back one slide here. I'm going back one slide, and look, there is this small map icon at the top, and if you select that, you immediately jump into one of the built-in apps on the left-hand side, and on the right. You see them, how it looks like if you click on it. This was a wine apparently from California, and on the right-hand side we had a wine from Piemonte in northern Italy. So how do we distinguish between devices? Well, there is this add platform thing. So using add platform, just using add platform, it gives you whether it's on iOS or on Windows 32 or Android. I should add that here. If you use add platform specific, you get a lot more detail, as you can see below, right? And based on this add platform, you start to use particular forms, subforms, views, and then you do whatever you want based on that. So this is, for instance, the startup page. What will we do? We had a page. I'm quickly here because I'm running out of time. I only have 4 minutes left, and Howard is going to kick me out if I'm not in time. So we got a page. It's just a table with some background images, and on that background images we put some hotspots, and we link to a frame. On the bottom right, you can see what we do here. We just open up. If you click on wines by vintage year, we just open up another frame set. So this is the frame set. At the top, I have a form, and the form has some drop downs, and I got an embedded view here. And on the right-hand side, I got a preview pane. So just by selecting something, we change the view, and if you click on something, you see the preview pane, and you see a form showing up. How do you do the filters? Well, of course, Notes doesn't have the notion of toggling the color of a button. So the only thing we do is we have each button we have in white and in gray in this case. If you click on white, well, we just use some hide when formulas to hide the buttons which are not necessary. If I click on red in this case, I just say, okay, the field type is now red, and the country is all, and I say just refresh all the data, and my embedded view is updated. It's as simple as that. I mean, the whole thing going from version 1 to version 2 took me less than 2 days. Okay. You can do, you can click on tabs here, the same thing. On the left-hand side, you see that I got a selected tab and an unselected tab, and I only have to put a data behind the unselected tab. And on the right-hand side, you see how you can switch. I just switch from tab, and it's a programmable table. I mean, I think we all worked with tables with switch rows programmatically, right? So it's easy to do. This is the one how we do the mapping to Apple. I mean, the only thing I do on the right-hand side, you see that I just have maps.apple.com, and I say the query is, and then behind it is just my region and my country. And that's something I pass to Apple, and Apple automatically opens up their interface, their local app. So they don't open the browser; they really open the app. So it's really easy to do. You can do all sort of things. So I developed things for customers where I have automatic dialing, for instance. You click on a phone number, and it automatically starts dialing the phone. Works really, really well, and extremely easy to do. This is something quite new, which has been adding in Notes 13.11. You have an action button with which you can show up, and you see that on the second image. You see that you got this black round button with some white lines in it, and if you click on that, then you can pop up a sort of menu, and that's something which you can do now since Domino version 11, and that's this little check mark thing on the action bar, on the action properties, include action and mobile actions, and it just works really good. The mobile swipe left, the mobile swipe right, it's already provided for in the designer, but it is not yet active in Nomad, but it is coming, and hopefully really soon. And that's it. Yeah. So I know it's quick. I only have 12 minutes. I normally do this presentation with a live presentation in 45 minutes. So I think I've done well. Thanks for joining in. You can download the app and the extended presentation from OpenNTF. It's completely open. Have a look, enjoy, and let me know what you think. And by the way, I'm trying to do the same thing for Vault. So maybe in the next feature release of this webinar from OpenNTF, we can show the vaulting. All right. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thanks, Theo. That would be great to have you come do the Vault equivalent in a couple of months. We're gonna hold you to that. Hey, Theo, before you go anywhere, now just to clarify for everybody, Nomad is just part of Domino, and it's all included in the base license, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's freely downloadable. Just download it from the App Store. What's the thing called in the Play, Google Play or something, and there you can just download it for free, and then you can use it. Just make sure that you got ID Vault running, and you're up and running in a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. All right, so this is a great example of what you can do with something you've already paid for. All right, next up is Luis, and I'm going to make you the presenter, Luis. And so Luis is going to talk about DQL Explorer. DQL is a Domino Query Language, and that's I'll let Luis explain what it is, but this is just an app that's ready to go out of the box, but underneath the covers, it uses the Domino Query Language, so it's a great tool to not only explore your Domino data using the tool as is, but tear it apart and see how you can use the Domino Query Language to do really fast queries to your data. Go ahead and take Luis, so I'm going to unmute you. Or you have to unmute yourself, I think, Luis. Well, Luis, you have to unmute yourself. Let's see. Luis cannot unmute myself. All right. I can't unmute you either, Luis. I don't know what's wrong. Let's see. Luis, you click on the in the interface on the top left, there's a little microphone with probably a red background. You got to click on that. Oh, I think all right, let's stand by for a second. I think Luis is rejoining our webinar. While we're waiting, let me just do a little poll. And just out of curiosity, let's see how many folks out there have used OpenNTF project before. Okay, looks like a lot of people have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out. So it looks like 76% of you have used an OpenNTF project before. So that's pretty good. And I got
Howard,
Luis is back.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you, and I'm making you the presenter, Luis.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened with my GoToMeeting app. So, okay, so, okay, perfect. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Howard, for inviting me. So guys, my name is Luis Guirigay. Some of you might know who I am, some of you might not. So I joined ACL about 2 months ago. I'm in charge of leading the technical advisor team, which is what at IBM you might call technical sales. Well, within ACL, we call that Tech Sales 2.0, but the official name is the technical advisor organization. I come from 22 years of consulting experience. I did work for IBM for about 6 years, and again, with ACL only 2 months. So what I'm here to talk about is the DQL Explorer. Just to give you some history, last year at Think 2019, we came up with this cool idea called the DQL Explorer as a pet project, or as a project that we just didn't know at the time where it was gonna go. But the idea was, and actually let me go to the next slide. The idea was to produce a very nice reporting utility taking advantage of Domino Query Language, or DQL, right? So as you guys know, I know as well, I spent many, many years doing Domino development, getting data outside Domino, just for reporting capabilities, just for, being able to report to create some charts or reports without me being a Domino developer was a challenge. So that's exactly what we wanted to do with this DQL Explorer tool. In addition to that, as we kept working on it, we actually added some small functionality that you as a developer, you could actually try your DQL code on the fly without having to go into your NSF and maybe rewrite the agent and grow the agent and do all those manual steps. So we gave you a couple of snippets on how that code would work. And in addition to that, we actually gave you some additional details of what the code would look like, when in a specific development language. Export the data, again, there are so many reporting tools out there where if you can create a CSV file or a JSON file and you can just move that file into this other third-party tool, there are so many amazing things you could do with that. And finally, again, when we decided to open source this solution back at when I was with IBM, it was because there are so many JavaScript frameworks on how to develop amazing reports. So I said, you know what, let's just make it open source. And if somebody likes to use A versus B or C versus D, it's totally up to you. That being said, you can get the DQL Explorer from OpenNTF. I know this is a very long link to remember, but just Google it, DQL Explorer, OpenNTF, and it's gonna take you to how you can download this tool right away. Now, what's the future, okay? The future, it's number one, I came to ACL 2 months ago. I cannot really speak for product management. I know they are looking at how they can enhance the functionality of DQL Explorer, but again, it's nothing committed yet. But the reality is that we decided to make this tool open source, so you are the future. This tool, DQL Explorer, is gonna go where you guys want it to go. So I'm gonna give you a live demo. So it's not only charts, but just in case, because again, the problem with a live demo is that you never know what's gonna happen. But I put a couple of links, how he can post this presentation later. So you will be able to click on all of them. But same thing, just go to Google, type DQL Explorer demo, and it will take you to some of these videos. So with that, let me give you a couple of examples here. Number one, the DQL Explorer is 100% Domino, nothing else. You can see on top, it's a .nsf. We use DQL. I got a couple of questions in the past. Do we need the app-dev pack? No, you don't need the app-dev pack. There might be some conflicting information in the on the OpenNTF side, probably my own fault, that when we documented the server where DQL was developed on, we had the app-dev pack installed. But the reality is that you don't need it because everything is running self-contained within a Domino database. Now, the other thing about the DQL Explorer is that it doesn't have to go, against a specific database. As you can see here, and again, this is totally up to you on how you want to customize your own deployment. The way we do it right now is that there are two configuration documents that you can access via nodes, and you can basically say all databases that are part of these specific directories, show it in the DQL Explorer, or you can actually call out databases by name, and I can show you that in a few minutes. But let me give you some basic use cases here. Let's say that you work in the HR department and you just want to see who is who has a pending vacation request. All you have to do without knowing development at all you have to do is create a new query and say, okay, and by the way, you have to create the new query against the database, right? So I selecting the vacation and travel database, and then I'm gonna use the form vacation. Now, if you want to deploy DQL Explorer, to your users, there are a couple of things you have to keep in mind as a developer. For example, you see that when I click on forms, I can see every single form inside the NSF. So you might want to take the code and customize it. Like, for example, some people, they like to use FRM or FM as kind of design element names. So you might want to do something like that. So via code, you actually filter that you only show the forms that you want to allow people to perform searches on. But let me go back here. So again, I have a form, which is the vacation form, and I want to find all the vacation requests that are pending. And in addition to that, I want to show who the employee name is. I know it's already pending. I want to know who their manager is, when the vacation starts, when the vacation ends. I can run the query, that's it. I found two documents. But before I show those two documents, now let's put my developer hat on and let's say, okay, guys, I never used DQL before. Instead of having the DQL Explorer, I actually want to use DQL within the code itself, right? Not something I want to give to the business users. So we enable this little toggle here that when you click on it, you can see the basic DQL statement. You can see what that code would look like if you do it in Java, if you do it on Node.js, if you do it on LotusScript, or if you just want to go to the Domino console and just type load dom query, blah, 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 and then you could see the results here. Now, this little explain functionality is an even higher level feature or deeper level feature, whatever you want to look at, that give you additional details on the performance and the runtime on that specific query. So let me go back here. You found that I found two documents. When I click on the result, I see Eric and Javier, they have a pending vacation. And from here, I can download the data as a CSV file or as a JSON file. Now, let me go back here and do a few more things. Number one is I want to make this query available to everybody inside my organization. So I'm just gonna call it OpenNTF query 1. And then I want to add some additional conditions that I want to find only those vacation requests that were, put on the system before January 1st. Let me go here. Perfect. So this is actually going to give me all the vacation requests that are pending, but the person was expected to go on vacation before mine, less than January 1st, 2020. I'm going to click the query again. And now you see that there are no documents. Why? Because maybe those two pending requests. All I have to do here is remove this one, okay? And actually, let me change this one to star, okay? Because they are not pending anymore. If I run the query again, now you see I have 5 documents. I click on the view result, and I can see that all these people put a vacation request that I don't know why it's coming this one, but should not be coming here, but less than 2020. Now, another good example, and again, this is more for like the business user type of person. And if I go back here, you can see that I open NTF1. If I save it, now it will be available to use by other people inside the organization. Now, let's do another query here. And this is more for like the Domino administrators in the room. Let me find all the users that are assigned to this specific Domino server, right? That changed the password. The last time they changed the HTTP password was, January 1st. So what I'm going to do here, and guys, this is live. So when I click here, I'm actually going live against the names.nsf database, and I'm looking for the person document or for the person form. And now I'm gonna start adding some conditions. Number 1 is the mail server, okay? Has to be mail. Hopefully I didn't make any typo here, okay? And then the next condition is that they change the HTTP password before, and I'm gonna have to switch here to date. Before this day, right? And what information I want to show? Well, I want to show the full name of the user. I want to show the internet address, and I want to see if they have some type of policy assigned, because the reason that they might not have changed the password is because, I don't know, maybe because there is not a policy in place for those users. So you see that here. I'm gonna give it a name, OpenNTF 2, and let me run the query right now. 85 documents. When I click on it, now you see that I find all these people, right, that are, in my Domino directory. I'm getting their email address, I'm getting their, notes name, and what policy they have applied to it. Another thing I might want to do here is, again, I can go back and, show me the mail file, because I also need to know that, just to make sure that, whatever reason I have, I want to look at that. Just add the mail file, run query again. Oops. And now it's not working, I don't know why, but you get the idea. And if I save this document, I go back here, and now you can see that I have a OpenNTF. If I remove, I think there were 85 documents before. If I remove the HTTP password condition and I run the, let me actually refresh here. Form, I'm gonna create a new one. I'm not gonna use the safe one. A person document, and that the mail file. And as I said, guys, I'm going live after the Domino server. So, there is a lot of fields that you might not want to show to your users. So you just gotta be careful with that, because in the code, this is all LotusScript and DQL running in the backend. So you might want to add your own filters in custom code, so you only show specific fields. Like, for example, one thing I did for another customer is we created configuration documents that, you know, for a specific databases, we actually limited the number of forms or view you could pull data from. So I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna select the full name, and I'm not gonna do the other ones. So just run query. Oh, I have a typo here. There you go. Now you see that 209 documents versus 85. That, again, this 209 document is just every single person document on my Domino directory. So that's the demo, guys. I'm gonna go back to this slide here. If you want to know more about the DQL Explorer, just Google DQL Explorer, OpenNTF. If you want to see a few more demos, right here. And again, it's an open source tool. You are more than welcome to use it, improve it, optimize it, take it to the next level. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Luis. That was great and right on time. So the next project we're going to talk about is OpenLog with Mr. Paul Withers. And OpenLog is something I know I try to use in almost every project I get involved in. It's a great way to kind of aggregate all your various log messages through various different types of programming languages. So Paul, I made you the presenter and we see your screen.
Hi. First off, OpenLog has been around for a long time. If we look at the releases on OpenNTF, then let me just refresh this. Then we'll see that the first release was back in 2007, and its last release was 2009. Now, this isn't because it's not being developed. It's simply because it's pretty much where it needs to be for OpenLog itself. So I've downloaded the database here. So the OpenLog database itself contains code for logging in 3 different languages. So we've got script libraries for Java, for LotusScript, and for JavaScript. Now, this is traditional client-side browser-driven JavaScript. It's not server-side JavaScript here. So those are the libraries that are available to run your code with. So we've got the script libraries here. So for the LotusScript, for example, we just need to copy that script library into the relevant database that you need to run it from and update the references. So the key reference is the log database name. So by default, the file path for that is openlog.nsf. Typically, I tend to leave that as it is, which means that this database, which holds all the logs, then is openlog.nsf in the data directory on the server. You can change that, you can override it. There are various other settings there as well. The one that I do just want to bring to attention is the no LSI stack trace. Now, by default, when you download the database, that's set to false. And that means that it uses LSI info to get the full stack trace, which is particularly useful, but it's an undocumented piece of functionality, and it's become more unstable in recent releases. So the recommendation is to set that to true so that it turns off the LSI info. There's a reference on, I think it's in either the defects or the discussions on here. Yes, here it is. So the recommendation is to turn that off because there are issues around it not being thread safe. And once you've got that, then there are some test agents that you can run to run it. But the actual use of the actual implementation of it, you just need to tell the script library to use that script library, tell your agent or your script library or your code in your form, and then at the relevant point, do call log error or call log event. So typically then I would have a block that if there's an error, go to log error. Remember that at the end of the code to do an exit sub, and then have that area, and then call log error and resume wherever you want it to resume after that. Could be the next line. It could be going to a specific cleanup block at the end. If you use lists, for example, then you know that the list needs to be erased before the end of it. If you're using a file, then you may need to close that file before you finish it. So you may well have a continue block in here. So I think it's resume continue in there. With and here we've got that kind of block. We've also got an example that's using stack trace. Now, for the stack trace, the on error block is just call add to stack trace. There's no that will automatically come out of here and bubble it up to the function that it's called from, and give you the full stack trace of which functions it's gone through, where it's called from, and those kind of things. So this means that you don't need to worry about knowing what the error number is and the API for that. You don't need to worry about how to get the full descriptive error. And you don't need to worry about setting up an agent log, which is one of the out-of-the-box options for logging. Instead, if we open that document, so here's one with the error logging, we get the line that it's occurring on, what the message is, what the error number is, all out of the box without any changes. And without any additional code, just with call log error. The additional stuff that we get is some really powerful stuff. So we get when the event happened, we also get the username, the effective username that it's running from, the client version or the server version if it's running on the server, the access level, the roles, the agent that it's coming from, the database. So we get a lot of additional information here, which is extremely useful. And just to give you an idea of just how useful this is, I had Errorlog running in a customer environment a number of years ago and was getting an error with the set target frame method. OpenLog told me that the client version was a version higher than I knew had been installed, and that specific version had a specific problem with set target frame. It wasn't a critical issue. The code still ran regardless of it, but without knowing that client version, I wouldn't have been able to pinpoint the cause. So it's extremely powerful from that point of view. For Java, the JavaScript library here is designed to be used in Java agents. It's not designed for Xpages Java. As you're probably aware, the agent runtime and the Xpages runtime are completely separate. So you need to bear that in mind. For the JavaScript function, again, you just put that JavaScript function, that JavaScript library on a form. here we have it. Oh, sorry, that's the display form. There isn't a sample here, but you just add that JavaScript library to the form and it handles everything for you. This is the beauty of such a powerful logging framework and why it's the standard for everyone. It's worth bearing in mind that you can also set up notification profiles. So you can set up a profile here so that for certain servers, certain database names, certain agent names, it will send you a notification out so that you can be proactively notified about any errors, right down to which agent or function it's coming from. As I mentioned, that doesn't cover X pages. If we go back to the summary here on the release, so when TaskJam came out, there was a server-side JavaScript library in that which used OpenLog. However, the problem when I came to using, looking to develop an X pages application for OpenNTF was that TaskJam wasn't Apache licensed. So I couldn't include it in an Apache licensed OpenNTF project without that. So I developed this project called OpenNTF X pages help application. And this had a X pages Java library in it. Thanks to Nathan Freeman, I initially did the transformation of it. Nathan cleaned it up a lot with considerably better Java knowledge than I had at the time. What then came along was Xpage's OpenLog logger. So we started to get a lot more additions around the code, so it made a lot more sense to separate that out into its own separate database. So this is the Xpage's OpenLog logger database, and it's doing the same kind of thing, except it's actually kind of going a lot further. One of the big problems with logging in Xpages is that if there isn't an error that's caught, then it just goes off to an error page. So what I added in here is a phase listener, so that if you've got an error page on your Xpages application, and hopefully you all have, that's defined in the XSP properties, you define the error page there. Then as the code goes off to that X page, and as that X page is loaded, I intercept the error messages and log them out so that you don't have to specifically add any logging anywhere on your X page. As long as you've got an error page in there, it will automatically handle it. Bear in mind that you can't just use the Xpages runtime error page because there's no way to intercept that. You need to add a specific error page, and then you will get much more detailed error logging and a full stack trace for it. Now the stack trace may look quite long, but we can see here that COM is not found on that state line of code here. That's because it's pointing to a piece of code that doesn't exist. There's some useful stuff in the stack trace though. We've got the caused by bit, which tells us the error that's hit. Most importantly, also up in the sun.faces.lifecycle phase stuff, you've got the phase of the refresh cycle in which the error is occurring. Now, invoke application will be the standard one. That's where your code runs, but it may also be in render response where it's trying to send the code back. It may be in the validation. And this is why it's important to understand the life cycle of X pages in order to do that troubleshooting. But as before, we get all the information of who's logged on at the time, what the server version is. It says client version, but because this code is running on the server, it's going to be the server version. We get the database and the X page name where the code is running, or it could be a Java managed bean, for example.
Hey, Paul, we have about a minute more.
Yep. So as before, that can be that's code that's in the Java area here that you can copy across. The best option is to use the OSGI plugin that's available, or if you're using OpenNTF Domino API, then again, it's in there for free out of the box. And if you look on wiki.openntf.org, then there's the full documentation that's basically what you see here in the database on how to use it and implement it. So that's everything that I had to offer. So back to you, Howard.
Great. Well, thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. And now we're going to turn over to Jesse, who's going to talk about actually two projects, mostly talk about the latest one he's been working on, the NSF ODP tooling, but he's also going to kind of talk a little bit about the Domino API because many of us have used that pretty extensively throughout the years. Jesse, you should be the presenter and you're still muted.
Okay, thank you. So I will begin by talking about the NSF ODP tooling, which is of my various open source projects, I think it's my personal favorite just for the amount of time it has saved me during my job. So the name is a little unassuming, but I'll go into the facets that it has. So first, a little quick thing about me. So my name is Jesse Gallagher. I'm at Gidgerby on Twitter, and I have a blog at frostilic.us. I'm on the OpenNTF board and have been for a while, do a lot of open source development and a number of other things. So on to the project. So the origins of this is that it really spawned from my need for one of my large client projects where I have a bunch of OSGI plugins, I have deployment instructions, I have a dozen NSFs, and I have this set up as Maven, and so that allows me to create a distribution zip. So I can just run this thing and then end up with the distribution, and there you go. There's the instructions, and here's all the plugins, and here's what you do. Great. But this required making binary copies of the NSF every time they're updated. So somebody would change something, and then like, okay, well, if it's, I'll build it and then make a copy in Designer, put it into the repo. And it would work, it would be there, but it's time intensive, it's error prone, and having binary blobs make Git angry, LFS or no. So I set out to automate this whole process, and I didn't want to be on the hook for this anymore. So I looked into ways to compile these NSFs automatically. So headless designer mode has shipped with Designer for a good while now. It was added in like 901 or 9 something around there. And Christian Gudeman, actually a while ago, wrote a Maven wrapper for this. So it's kind of it intends to be what this first step will do. However, it's Windows only, so it's Designer. It can only work on Windows. UI automation is extremely fault prone. So what Headless Designer actually does is it launches Designer and says, hey, Designer, run this Eclipse command, and it will run through some stuff, and then quit Designer, and then it'll launch it again to do another step of it, and it will launch it again. This is extremely fault prone. Essentially what it has to do is just wait for the UI to look like it's done. And then in addition to this is combines with the fiddliness of plugin installation. So say you have an update site that the NSF uses, Designer tries to install it. Sometimes it just fails. Sometimes it tells you why. Sometimes it doesn't. And essentially, it means having a active UI Windows VM somewhere. It can work, but it failed enough that I wanted to launch this entire different project. I'll put it that way. So the tooling grew beyond that. So what does it do? So the first aspect of it is that it compiles an ODP to an NSF. So this is my immediate problem of you have an on-disk project, much like usually one that you will have exported from Designer, and you want to compile it as part of a Maven project. So you'll just do Maven install, it'll compile all your update sites, and then you end up with an NSF. But I expanded it from there. It also does the reverse. It takes an NSF and it converts it to an ODP. So whether it's one that you're actively managing with Designer or just, this could be a replacement for actively managing with Designer, this will take an ODP or an NSF locally or on a server and export it to an ODP in the same format that you would expect with Designer, except it has some extra niceties in that it has built-in swiper support. So it cleans up the DXL. It does NTF deployment. So this is a little experimental because I'm waiting on some ideally HCL to solve the problem, but if they don't, then I will have to do it. This lets you deploy an NTF to a server. So the idea with it is that this would be part of a full tool chain where you will build the application, you will deploy it, and then deploy it somewhere to a Domino server, ideally testing, not to production. But you could, if you wanted to, if you're very confident that your master branch is production ready, you could deploy it there. So this is the final step of the CI/CD pipeline. And then it also does, it had some IDE support. So this has a couple aspects. So it adds a designer-esque project layout in Eclipse. I'll have a screenshot of that. It allows you to edit the X pages side Java code in basically the same way that you would in Designer, but nicer. And then it does DXL and XSP autocomplete in both Eclipse and Visual Studio Code, which is a fun, nice little addition I could do. So ODP compilation. So it takes an ODP where here you have, and you wrap it up in a Maven project. So if you're not familiar with Maven, the operative file here is the pom.xml. It stands for Project Object Model, I believe. And it's, it's a general way of doing Java development and other kinds of development. But what it means here is that you create this POM file and that describes your on-disk project. By default, it's just going to be look in the ODP folder. And then the target folder is kind of the Maven standard of this is where the results go. And so the idea here is that it builds through, it builds all the dependencies, then builds the NSF, and then you end up with just, NSF example 1.0.nsf. So there you go. You don't have to open Designer. You don't even have to be on Windows. This can run locally if you're on a machine that has either a Domino or Notes installation, or it can run against a remote server. So for example, you could do this on a Raspberry Pi if you wanted to, or you just have a machine building it and then it points to a Domino server where you have these plugins installed. It can do the compilation for you and give you the result while everything else happens locally. ODP export. So like I was saying, this is equivalent to Designer's associate with on-disk project export. A little better because of the swiper improvements. But this is, again, a Maven plugin, so you can use it standalone. So actually, as part of my IP management duties at OpenNTF, I use this where I'm given an NSF, as most projects consist of an NSF, and I will run it through this exporter and say, okay, give me the files so I can look at these and run my tools on them and all that stuff. So it lets you do it on just a file, or it lets you do it as part of a project. So another use for it is that in my client's project, a couple of the databases are done fully in source control because kind of the X Pages team, we do that. But then some of the others are developed by a guy who refuses to use source control and has the clout to allow him to refuse to use source control. So I have a little script that runs through all of those and says, okay, export these from their current production ones and just say, okay, this is the ODP. So I have a script that goes through, again, at that point, it's like 10 of the NSFs, and then updates them. And again, this is all no Designer required. I sit here on my Mac, I fire up terminal, I run the script, and it exports everything nicely for me. NTF deployment. So this is something where it'll deploy to a remote Domino server. This essentially, the idea is that this is like if you went through the process of copying the database to your Notes data directory, naming it .ntf, then doing file replace design. It's a little limited by the fact that there's not currently a public or known API for doing replace design in the way that Notes does it. I found some example scripts online that don't quite do everything. So for now, it'll run on the server and use the convert command, which seems to work, but it's kind of in progress. It works for some uses, but this is something that I definitely want to improve. Now, IDE support. So even though this has actually saved me less time than some of the other things, it's also the flashiest. So it has that going for it. So IDE support, it has a plugin on the Eclipse side where you can see here that it adds all these these pseudo folder things. So forms, views, folders, X pages, all the things that you would expect from Designer show up here. Now, these do not include visual editors for all of these. So you're still editing the DXL, but as I'll get to in a little bit, you do have some assistance there. But this lets you organize things in kind of like a nicer way. So I do have, and I go back and forth on how much time I want to spend on these aspects. I do have some ideas for how I could do some sort of visual editors. I would love to be able to edit views, not using Designer in particular, because the way you edit views is essentially pivoted from the easiest way for a developer to edit views. And so it would be nice to have some additional support there, but for now, at least, it's organized nicely and you get little icons. A little more importantly for actual programming is that it configures the project in a similar way to how Designer sees the world for Xpage's Java development. So when Designer opens up an NSF with Xpages, it configures it essentially like an OSGI plugin, but it's all hidden from you. So it depends on core Xpages classes. It depends on whatever Xpages libraries you have checked, and it does all of this stuff and builds a dependency chart for you, essentially. And so what this does is replicate that same kind of thing. So it reads the list of dependency plugins, it reads any embedded jars, and it reads any jars that are expected to be on the file system on the server that you've configured for the project, and builds a project for you. So you're able to use dependency classes, you're able to use normal Xpages classes, and so you could edit all of this stuff. And this actually comes in tremendously handy. So again, in my case where I have a bunch of OSGI plugins, a bunch of NSFs, if I go and refactor something in a plugin, say change a method name and tell Eclipse to refactor that method name, then it will also update all the code in the NSF. This is as opposed to the normal cycle of make the change in the plugin, build that plugin, install it into Designer, restart Designer, open the project, and then see what broke. Here, it all just happens all at once because Eclipse now has a view of the entire thing, and it's whole, it has all the plugins, it has all the NSFs, it knows about all of this stuff and how they're related. So it ends up being a much, much, much more pleasant way to do in NSF Java development, first off, just in general, but also in particular when you're depending on OSGI plugins. Now I added DXL and XSP autocomplete. So this is the one where I get to say, hey, look, it works in Visual Studio Code. So Domino for a long time now, and this is one of the nicest things that IBM did, at least for me personally, is that it ships with DTDs and XML schemas for DXL, and they keep them up to date. And the redistribution license is such that it says, hey, you're allowed to redistribute this as long as you say that that's what you're doing and you don't modify it. So I include a DXL schema. So if you edit DXL in Eclipse or Visual Studio Code with this, then it will know all about what is allowed where, what the options are for different things. And similarly for Xpages. Now, for Xpages, this didn't come for free, but what I did was I built a tool that looked through the active Xpages environment, because essentially when a version of Domino is shipped, the Xpages and extension library are effectively frozen for that version, and probably all versions, but that one especially. And I can say, okay, for this one, I know, these are the controls, these are the parameters, these are their values, and also this is their help text. So I was able to go in and say, okay, as you can see here, it knows that form table is a component. It knows that this is the help text. And then if I finish writing form table, it will tell me what the available parameters are, the attributes. And so it has all of this stuff with knowledge ahead of time, just because of the way, that XML works. And one of the niceties is that I implemented this using what's called the XML language server. So XML language servers in general are a way to abstract the editing of code from the specific IDE. So historically, IDEs have all had to implement, their own version. So in Designer, if you want to edit LotusScript, then IBM had to go in and write an editor for Eclipse, and so that some of that is probably a little abstracted, but mostly it's using Eclipse terminology, Eclipse specific stuff. So there wouldn't be a really good way to bring that over to, say, IntelliJ or something. But with a language server, what you say is, okay, well, in the back end, I don't care what the language server is doing. It can be written in Java, it can be written in Python, whatever. Just have this standard protocol, and then any IDE can talk to it. So Visual Studio Code is essentially all language servers, and Eclipse is going in that direction too. With Wild Web Developer is the name of the plugin. And so what I did was I wrote some plugins for this specific XML language server that is shared between them. And then that means that, if IntelliJ includes it or other IDEs use the XML language server, I will be able to just have a plugin for those and include the same kind of enhancement. So that was a nice thing there. And then, for now, that rounds out the capabilities. In general, I'd say that the first step, the compilation, is what has by far saved me so much time. Like just having it in that tree, where I now have a Jenkins server that builds each of the branches, so master, develop, and any release branches. It automatically looks for those. It downloads the source, it runs through the entire installation, it compiles all the NSFs cleanly, and then ends up with a zip. So I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to copy NSFs around. I don't have to manually work with Designer, except for little bits here and there. But it just does all this stuff automatically. It's controlled, it's clear, it's platform independent, and everything just works so much smoothly, and it saved me so much time. So that covers the NSF ODP tooling. And I'll finish up with a quick update on the OpenNTF Domino API. This will consist of one slide. Basically, it's still chugging along. A couple releases ago in R10, we switched to a match the domino release strategy. So previously we had named them like 3.1 and 4.4. And so we ended up saying, okay, well, it makes more sense to just say, because we personally were never sure, did 4.4 mean 901 FP10 or what? We just said, okay, we'll match the version of Domino, especially now that there are new versions of Domino. It makes a lot more sense. So every time there's a new release, R10, 10.01, 11, 11.01, we go in and say, oh, these are the new methods. We add those in. If we know what they do, we'll add in some JavaDoc. And so we release that. And then sometimes we work in some bug fixes and improvements. Like I did something with garbage collection not that long ago. But in general, it kind of does what it's supposed to do. It improves on the core Java backend classes and mostly brings them up to modern expectations, and it works. So it's, I'd say don't expect big churning there, but that's also intentional because you probably don't want your core API to be churning and changing constantly. So that about covers it for both of those. So I will hand this back to Howard.
Thanks, Jesse. That was great. So let's move on to questions. But before we do, we just want to point out that our next webinar, as I said, we're hoping to make this a regular series. So the next webinar, it will be sometime in June. We're still trying to lock down the exact date. The idea is to have HCL present with Richard Jeffs giving an update on product strategy and direction, and possibly some of the other HCL staff as well. So we have a URL for the webinars at OpenNTF. It's on the screen. You can keep up to date there, and we hopefully will get information about the date and how to register for the next webinar in the post-webinar email that we'll send out early next week. As I mentioned before, we'll also record this webinar and put that recording, the link to that recording will be up on YouTube, but we'll put the link in the post-webinar email as well. So now it's time for questions. I know that there were quite a few questions. Some of those were answered already. Graham, looks like you've been going over them. Do you have some questions? I guess we'll start off and kind of group them by the project. Do you have any for Theo that we want to go over? Let me unmute. I'm going to unmute all our participants for you guys. So if our participants can unmute themselves.
Yeah, there were questions in the Nomad section around JavaScript support, and actually there was a question about mobile device management systems. That's one that we're going to have to go and do some research with OpenNTF. And what I've basically been doing is where we're not able to answer the questions, we're going to get the answers and then we'll put together some blogs. So there was a question around JavaScript support, and Theo, you came back with a list of more what's not supported, I guess. I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, indeed. There is the only thing I could find on the website. I haven't tried it yet, but on the website of ACL, if you just search for ACL Nomad and even limitations, then you get there. It is a list of what's not supported. And on that list, JavaScript is not added. So I would assume that it works. I haven't tried it yet. I don't use JavaScript a lot in the Notes client. Remember, it is a Notes client. It's not a web environment. It is a pure Notes client. So everything that works, except for the limitation of Java and Windows calls, everything that works in classic Notes is supported.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the demo database. It was a discussion database that HCL was showing when they first started talking about Nomad, that showed LotusScript and app function formulas and various odd things that you can put behind buttons working in the Notes client, and then they actually demonstrated the exact same functionality in Nomad.
Right, I think that's a good point, is that it basically is like a Notes client, and so JavaScript and Notes client is pretty limited functionality. It's not like you're going to be able to start executing, JavaScript in the Apple OS.
No, that's indeed. It
Yeah.
is a Notes client. Yeah, so
Exactly.
treat it as one.
That's so exactly, Theo.
Then the questions moved on to DQL Explorer, and there was a question about being able to search multiple databases. Luis, you're still muted there. But yeah, we were going around questions, kind of swinging questions between DQL Explorer and DQL itself. But anyway, the question was specifically about being able to search multiple databases using DQL Explorer, Luis.
Yeah, so when we developed DQL early in 2019, like literally the first week of January last year, you could only do DQL against one database at a time. I know the Domino development team has been looking, if not done already, to be honest, I will have to go back and check if already done. But they were looking at making sure that you could run DQL statements against multiple databases at the same time. If not already done, I'm pretty sure it's part of the roadmap.
Thank you. Actually, there was a couple of other questions I skipped past with respect to Nomad. One in particular asking about specific detailed articles or tech notes or primers on getting Nomad up and running. Does anybody have any resources they can share?
I do, and we can post it in there afterwards. Following the CollabSphere contest last year, I put together a tutorial for taking the to-do application, which was the basis for that, and creating a Nomad front end for it. Basically, for all of my development of Nomad stuff, I typically just test in the Notes client and just do a final pass in Nomad itself. So there's that tutorial, and I'll post the link to that so that we can have that in the blog post that we do as a result. But that tutorial walks you through creating the Nomad UI for it.
Thanks, Paul. There was another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Howard.
I was just going to help you out, Graham. There's another question for Luis about limiting the number of results you return, or have an offset like SQL.
Yeah, so there are 3 Notes INI variables that you can set on the Domino server. One is on a view, how many documents you want to limit the search on at the level of the database itself. How many documents you want to restrict, and also the timeout, like, after X number of milliseconds, you can actually time out. So just Google DQL limits. That will tell you how you can customize that. Just be careful that you don't want to millions of documents or unlimited timeouts, because that could be some negative effects. But just play with the numbers, and it's all there for you to try it out.
Just
Okay,
checking
good.
on any DQL Explorer questions.
Hello, everyone. This is Prashant here. Can I?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, this is a question regarding Nomad. I mean, so I think through Nomad, I guess we can only open the databases only through the Explorer. I mean, through this. I mean, we cannot just type in the database name and open, right, at the moment. So, like, I mean, like I was trying to open a mail.box through Nomad.
Well,
sorry, you tried to open what?
Sorry?
I didn't get the question. You tried to open what you said?
A mail.box. Mail.box.
Mailbox. No, mailbox is not supported. It's not supported in the notes or in the ACL application access either, or in the notes basic. So, no, it does not.
Okay, so you mean to say, I mean, we cannot open the mail.box. Yeah.
No, you can't. You can't open your mailbox, right? Mail.box is probably it's just a simple database, but your mailbox you cannot open in Nomad.
Okay.
Oops, sorry about that. Okay. Speakers, if you could go ahead and, I think I accidentally muted you. So sorry about that. Okay, so let's see, we'll wait for our speakers to unmute themselves. Graham, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yep, there I am back. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. GoToWebinar learning experience. We got some questions for Jesse, if you could unmute yourself. And I see you're unmuted. So Jesse, got a couple for you. Is it possible to migrate XPages Java development from Designer to Eclipse, but leave out the OSGI stuff?
So assuming that means, if you have a project that doesn't have any XPages libraries, like any OSGI plugins that you developed, absolutely yes. So in fact, you could use this without, you could use the build tools without any XPages code at all. Like, most of the UI work is on the XPages side, but there's nothing that requires having kind of the whole setup of OSGI plugins and features and distribution. You could have a Maven project that just consists of an ODP and have that build automatically. So you'd be able to use, if you're doing XPages development with embedded jars or Maven dependency jars that would be deployed to the server, then you can absolutely use it for that without all of the trappings.
Okay, and then while you're on, Jesse, is there a way to set the signer of the generated database? I assume the NSF or NTF?
So currently, that actually gets into a big question, but currently no. So it's done, when you generate it, if you're compiling locally, it's the ID file of the notes or Domino installation that you're using. And then if you're compiling against a remote server, it's that server. The trouble is that it would get into this kind of whole ID vault, detach ID, change password kind of, like it's not really a thing that's straightforward to do. So it's whatever the process is. During deployment, I do have an optional step to sign the deployed application as the server. So if you're using that, you could do that. Otherwise, the process would be, and this would, is probably pretty common in a lot of cases, would be to deploy, do a replace design and then sign the database with administrator.
Oh, okay, thanks, Jesse. And I think, Graham, did you have any other questions?
There's a couple of good questions. One about the community edition of the Domino server. So there was a question just about is HCL providing a free version of Domino for developers to be able to work with? And that was a question that came up in the closing session of Collabsphere 2019 in Boston with HCL up on the panel. And I remember specifically talking to Andrew Mamby about it. It was something that IBM did that didn't come over in the transition to HCL, but HCL is aware that lots of people are asking for it in the community. So I haven't heard any further news on it at this point, but I do know at the time they said that that was something that they were really wanting to be able to provide to the community. So I'm expecting that it's still in process, air quotes, unless anybody else on the panel has any other information on that.
No, I know that I've mentioned that quite a few times. I mean, if you are a contract developer or, you know, basically running a business, they do have a partner program. There's no charge for that, unlike IBM. And that gives you access to the software for your own use. Might be something to explore. And I know, like in the past, even with IBM, and I assume the same is true with HCL, I've seen people talk about it, that you can purchase a client license for a very nominal sum of money, and you get access to the server code as well. So if you're, you know, in the business spending $50, $75, it's not a big deal. You just got to find a reseller who will process that order for you. So that's an option too.
And just
okay,
to
we're
manage
coming up to... Go ahead, Paul.
Just to manage expectations on, surely this is an easy thing to turn around. I was involved with speaking to IBMers for that community edition. It took 18 months. Lawyers are not quick at releasing stuff, so please do bear with HCL. It's not something that happens quickly with any organization. So just to put some context there.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, we're coming up to the bottom of the hour, so I'll hand it back to you in 1 second. I got one more question I want to answer, and then I think we can wrap it up. There was a question about the old resources on notes.net and how active all of that stuff was. And there's been quite a number of members of the IBM Champions and HCL Masters community making noise with HCL to get a lot of that content moved over. It, of course, did not move over in terms of notes.net. It didn't move over with the move to HCL. IBM has essentially shut down that site and removed a lot of that content. HCL has been working quite hard to get a lot of that content moved over. They understand how we as a community like to consume that content. And in fact, some of it is starting to be made available now. HCL Master David Habowitz, the notes guy in Seattle, has put up a blog post with links to many of those resources, and we'll continue to monitor that. It's kind of an in-process thing. But if you go to David's blog, you'll find the post, and it has the links to where you can find the content that is available. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Howard.
Oh, thanks, Graham. And Graham, I have you on the line. Do you know of any people in the community who are HCL resellers who would be interested in handling single client requests, or is that something they just got to check with HCL on?
I do know that HCL will handle those orders directly. I know that IBM didn't like to used to do that stuff, but I have had that conversation with HCL, and they will take direct orders.
Oh, okay.
But any of the business partners that you're familiar with, without singling anyone out because I'm a business partner, but any of the business partners that are active in the community are licensed to resell Domino as well.
Okay, great. All right, well, we are at the end of time, so I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and especially thank our presenters today who volunteered their time to pull together the presentation and share their knowledge and talk about their projects. So remember, this OpenNTF is a community organization. We'd love for you guys, everyone, to get involved. If you want to get involved, don't know what to do, just get a hold of someone on the board and we'll find something for you to do. There's projects that could be worked on. There's all sorts of things we could find. So please consider volunteering and helping out. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. We will be in touch with an email sometime early next week with the recording and a link to where the slides are presented so you can access everything. Thank you. Take care.
Hi, everyone.